Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the February edition of Molten Music Monthly. God, it feels like we haven't done one of these in ages. The last time we did one back in January was after NAMM, when there was tons and tons of stuff to talk about, after which we go into a bit of a dip and then you start thinking about other things and getting on with your life, and just when you think you might discover some other hobby or something to occupy yourself, no, we are back and we're ready to go. We've got a whole bumper load of stuff for you today. But I should start by giving a shout out to Colin, who's out there somewhere. Happy birthday, mate. Your Sarah got in touch and asked me just to say hello. I feel like a Radio 2 DJ. Anyway, what do we have coming up this month? Robaux gives us 3 rings and 7 modes of voltage. Ampethron futuristically mashes up gaming and music. Genesis Pro offers a fabulous synth for $1. The Moog Vocoder returns so that we can all become cylons. StaffPad gets a huge update. Arpeggio is a little synth in a little box. Deckard's Dream gets a sequel. Can you control synths with your mind? The Omsonic Stochastic Inspiration Generator is here. G-Storm have an Oberheim filter. Squarp is getting into sampling. FLUX does time travel rhythm sequencing. XFM2 is a DX7 in your pocket. Daisy could be a very cool development platform. Electron leak the model cycles and insist on sticking with that really dodgy stylistic choice. And Ratchet could be the Eurorack rhythm machine you've been waiting for. But first, Devil Fish and Behringer in a fight to the death. Yes, this is the story about modifications to the Behringer TD3. The TD3, as we know, is a TB303 clone that's recently hit the shops and is now the #1 product on the world over ever with synthesizers. Well, the TB303 has quite a healthy modding community out there, people who have been sticking screwdrivers and bits of stuff into the original 303 in order to give it bigger functionality. One of the big ones of those is Devil Fish, or the Devil Fish modification, which is run by a guy called Robin Whittle, and he's been doing it for years. And this little Devil Fish modification has added things like some more CV, in, outs, overdrive, FM, envelope, filter tweaking, and bits and bobs. It's a nice piece of work and costs an arm and a leg to get done. And initially when the TD3 came out, Robin had a look at it and thought, yeah, I reckon we can mod that as well. Great, a load more business, because the world is kind of running out of original 303s now. And so it had the potential to give the Devil Fish thing a whole other generation of stuff to work on. Great. But then, out of the blue, up on the internet popped a mock-up of the Behringer TD3 with what looked suspiciously like the entire Devil Fish modification already built in, with a question from Behringer going, well, would you like us to do like one of these with these mods in it and stuff? And everyone went, yeah, that'd be great, how awesome, great, let's do that. To which Mr. Whittle said, just a moment, because that's my mod, that's my technology, I did that. You can't just give it away in a TD3. I'd charge thousands of pounds to do that into people's machines, and that's kind of like a bit off, don't you think? What, I use sort of stronger language than that, really, and I had a bit of a rant about the whole thing, saying how awful it was that they could possibly be doing this. But he did also speak about how Behringer had been in touch with him to see whether they can work out some kind of deal, and essentially he says no, they weren't able to work something out. They didn't really have the same idea as where things were going, and so they decided to go separate ways. And now he's a little bit upset that Behringer has gone, oh, all right, then I'll do it anyway, and is potentially going to put out this Devil Fish modded TD3. I mean, they weren't even sort of shy about it. They're calling it the TD3-DF for Devil Fish. So you think, oh wow, that's just Behringer doing their thing, man. That's what they're like. They just take whatever they like, and they just clone it and they do it. However, there's another side to this story, as there always is. And Uli Behringer got onto the GearSluts forum where he likes to post, and said, well, that's not really what happened. according to this other side of the story, Behringer got in touch with Robin at Devil Fish and said, hey, let's work together. Why don't you do some stuff? I love what you've done. Can we use the stuff, do a bit of an endorsement thing? It'll be fun. Do a few designs. It'll be great. And Behringer offered up the idea of doing some work together and something like 15 grand in cash for the right to use his name and get the endorsement and such like. Well, it turns out that Robin didn't turn Behringer down exactly. He asked for something else. He asked for more. A lot more. He asked for either a massive cut of every single one that was ever sold, or a $350,000 a year. A year, 300 grand a year, right, is what he asked for. And he wanted complete control, artistic control, creative control, design control, and all these other bits and pieces. A very, very, very long proposal of what it was that he wanted out of this deal. To which Behringer said, yeah, that's not really what we do. So thanks and that, but we'll just do our own thing. Because, there's nothing essentially copyright about the Devil Fish modification, because they're already breaking the warranty on stuff and breaking rules of modification and bits and pieces to do with the Roland 303 in the first place. So it's not the sort of thing that you can legally copyright, because it's already a mod. It's a breaking of somebody else's product to sort of put your product in there. And so Behringer are absolutely free to take this sort of information, sort of mods that have been done, and to do really what they like with them. So you end up with this story of an angry Robin Whittle going, oh, Behringer, just stealing all my stuff, and Uli Behringer going, well, we offered the opportunity to work with us and we just can't possibly reward you the amount you wish to be rewarded. It would double the price of the TD3, and that's just not our game. And what's interesting about all this is how the internet reacted, because there was this swing going on. Everyone first of all coming out on the side of Robin going, well, oh no, the little guy being abused by the nasty Behringer one. But then the other information started coming out and you're going, oh, okay, well maybe he asked for what exactly? And so it goes round, and I think it's very interesting how it demonstrates the biases that people have, because there's a certain group of people for whom Behringer will always do wrong, and there's another group of people for which, well, they don't care, they just want cheap stuff. And it doesn't matter what the facts are, it doesn't matter what actually was said or not, each side will find ways to support their argument and will really double down on it. So it's been interesting seeing and watching and taking part in conversations about it.
My view, I don't know, what's my view? What does my view matter? I don't know. I think, Uli Behringer has been sort of doing a bit of back and forth on this, really. Initially he did publish an email, a private email exchange between him and Robin, but Robin had sort of already done that first. At least he'd quoted from the very same email. And essentially, Uli was just trying to set the record straight, because Robin didn't really give the whole picture of what had gone on. He didn't mention anything about his own demands as far as his conversation with Behringer goes. And so was able to paint Behringer in a very, very poor light. And perhaps Behringer's within their rights to defend themselves in that way. But is it right to publish an email then? I don't know. If you're defending yourself, you need to present some kind of proof of that, don't you? I don't know. So as I say, my view is, I don't know. Behringer aren't doing anything illegal as such, but is it morally right? Is it ethically right? I don't know. They're developing a product. They'd like to do a version that's got lots of modifications inside. In fact, since that argument, they've also asked the internet, what other modifications are out there that you'd like us to include? Could we do a super uber modded TD3? Would that be interesting? Yeah, probably. Is that putting a whole load of people out of business? I don't know. It's the thing is interesting about Robin saying about the TD3 and how that could have been something that he could have continued to mod, because there really isn't the business out there for original 303s anymore. So, it's not as if they're stealing his business. They're just kind of preventing him from making money off the TD3, I guess. Oh, I don't know. We'd all like everything just to be lovely and everyone to be allowed to produce their own things and no one infringes on anybody else. But that's not really the nature. It's not really the nature of the business. It's not where any of this came from. I mean, Eurorack, for instance, is based absolutely on cloning and modding other people's gear. It all comes from Moog, it comes from Buchler, it comes from Korg, Oberheim. All these people are cloning and redesigning and taking on older ideas and building them into Eurorack, and that's where it all came from. A lot of synths do the same, guitar pedals do the same, guitars themselves are the same. It all builds on each other and takes from each other. Behringer just does it in what seems to be quite an in-your-face way, and that, I think, gets people's back up. But I guess the result is that Robin comes away with nothing, really, and Behringer's going to plough on producing an Uber TD3, which I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. Interesting times. Now this is an interesting module. It's a 3-channel voltage generator. I mean, it looks fantastic. It's just got a single knob, a little matrix of knobs beneath it, and this rings around this single knob which light up and glow and spin around presumably as you do stuff. Well, I don't know, it's an indication of something, isn't it? And the big knob tends to be about intensity or speed or range. It's like a macro over whatever it is mode you're running, because it will run 7 modes, which means very different forms of CV are being generated out the bottom. It has a self-explanatory LFO mode. It has a chord mode. It has a quantizer mode. It has a randomization mode and a note mode. And if that's 7 things, then that's a very useful 7-function CV tool. But I'm totally loving the display. Those 3 rings, the way that goes around, that in itself makes it a very interesting product. Our old friend, the Ampethron synthesizer thing, has made a bit more noise again. It's still not scheduled for release until September, I believe it is, but they've decided to just give us a little bit more information rather than the teasing of the weird, futuristic, most extraordinary sci-fi synth you've ever not seen yet, because you haven't yet seen it. They've now decided to release videos of something going on, and it has a new name. It's now called the Ampethron Portable, which is a bit of a letdown, really. I think you could have done something better with that. Could have called it the Ampethron Rocket, or Ampethron Explosion, or something, but anyway, it's just a name. So what is it exactly? Have we worked it out yet? Because I was sort of suggesting it might just be an iPad app. And it's not an iPad app, it's a little tiny PC app. So what we get is a little square box with a touchscreen integrated into it, with a very futuristic and Tron looking, rather nice interface for doing all your synthy stuff on it. But that's not where the innovation lies, because it is essentially just one of those Intel NUC little PC boxes. Great, it's got all the PC bits and pieces on the side, network sockets and such like. But that's fun. It's a little PC with its own OS dedicated to running this particular synth. Great, but the innovation apparently lies in the way it can be controlled, because not only can you touch the screen and play it from a keyboard, you can control it with an Xbox controller. Oh yes, Xbox controller, innovation in spades here. What we've seen, that's been around for ages. There's tons of stuff out there for getting these sorts of controllers to work with MIDI, lots of them. So I'm a bit perplexed, really, or confused as to why they believe that this is a groundbreaking, extraordinary thing. I mean, it's a useful thing for old Xbox controllers. You've got one knocking around that you no longer want to use. But no, apparently, as far as the Ampethron is concerned, this is a vital thing that changes the whole game as to how you play with synthesis. Yeah, a couple of joysticks. Nice, we like that. That's good. Buttons and stuff. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you'll feel a bit foolish standing in front of a crowd playing an Xbox, perhaps. But we feel foolish standing in front of people anyway, so I don't really know what that matters. So what they've said is that using things like MIDI keyboards and stuff like that is hard. It's too hard. And so that's not going to be about all of that. It's not going to be about playing instruments on a keyboard. It's going to be about sort of triggering stuff and controlling stuff. So it's this piece of software, which is this futuristic synthesizer, is sort of morphing into more of an effects trigger. It's like one of those iPad apps where you hit a couple of things and different sounds and effects come out. It's more to do with controlling how sound is being processed on your little controller rather than creating the sound itself. Yeah, the more I talk about it, the less interesting it appears. I think it's just going to be a sound effects triggering box. You know, you got your rave going on, music's coming from something else, you know, a mixed track or vinyl or something, and you're just going, chow, wait for the drop, things, you know, things like that on your controller. I mean, that might be fun. I don't know. It's certainly cheap, surprisingly cheap. It's something like $369, and this is for the box and the controller. You know, and controllers themselves aren't that cheap. So it seems reasonably priced for an effects synthy somehow performance box that we still don't really know what it's all about. But there's all sorts of things in the specs and in the details that make it sound impressive. It's just trying to really drill down into what this thing actually is. Maybe we'll never know. Maybe we'll come back in a few months and talk about it again. Now, I met Ozcan is a bit of a producer guy, and he's been working on his dream synthesizer for many years, and now it's about ready. Although he said about 5 years ago that it was about ready, and he said about 5 years before that it was about ready. So who can tell? But according to the latest video on it, it's about ready, and it's only going to cost you $1 or €1 or something like that. And for that, it seems quite remarkable. It's called Genesis Pro, and from what you can make out, it's got a rather nice interface. It's a hybrid synthesizer dealing in subtractive synthesis and wavetable synthesis and all sorts of bits and pieces being plumbed in and pulled about together. Lots of modulation, lots of filters. I mean, after 8 years of work, he's been working on this thing. It is quite an immense synthesizer. I mean, he wanted it to be everything, and he wanted it to be deep, and he wanted it to be complex and yet simple, you know, intuitive and yet multi-layered, multifaceted, with everything and yet simple, you know, all those classic sort of lines. And it appears to be that. What also seems to come out of this latest video on it is that it's actually made in SynthEdit. Now, SynthEdit is an ancient old way of building VST instruments and plugins. I mean, a lot of good stuff has come out of SynthEdit over the years, but it is rather old, to the point that there is no 64-bit version, and so ultimately his plugin will be 32-bit only, on Windows only. And that seems a shame. After the amount of work he's put in and the potential for it, it's slightly restrictive. Although most DAWs, to be fair, can run 32-bit plugins. But inside it you can layer up all sorts of synthesis, subtractive, phase distortion, FM, multi-wave and samples, and create this enormous soundscape. It's kind of, you know, in some ways there's another one of those huge does everything virtual instruments, of which there are several these days. But it's certainly attractive at the price of $1, and it will be interesting to see whether it actually emerges. Vocoders then. I don't get it. I don't know. I mean, it's a one sound deal, isn't it? A vocoder. We've done that, haven't we done that? Didn't we do that like 40 years ago? I don't know. People are going nuts over the reissue of the Moog Vocoder. I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of kit. You've got a whole big chunky box there with all these patch sockets on the front, 16 bands of frequency filtering, Watsetting, in order to give you that vocoding effect, so that when you play notes and speak into it, you've got signal carrier thing going on, one modulating the other. Fantastic. And you get that sound, that Daft Punk sound, if you like, that old 70s funk sound, the sound of the Battlestar Galactica cylons, which is where I like it.
Apparently it was not as big a surprise as we had hoped for.
That's where I like to use a vocoder, in that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about it is that you can repatch it completely, so it's not set as to what is going into what and how that is arranged. Not that I really, as you can tell, know a whole lot about how vocoders work, but you can put these filters all over the place and patch it to make interesting, crazy sounds that all sound a bit like a vocoder. It's also going to be $6,000. Yeah. See, look, I got one here, right? In my microcorg. As are the cylons we have come to assimilate. Oh, that's not right, is it? But $6,000? $6,000? I am evidently out of touch with the value of things, I think, these days. Anyway, it should be available later in the year. StaffPad is a beautiful piece of software, piece of notation score writing software that's been the darling of Microsoft and their Surface platform, because it was a genuinely gorgeously designed piece of software that actually took advantage of everything the Surface offered. It took advantage of the touch, it took advantage of the digital pen. It would only run on Windows and was a fantastic product that you could get from the Windows Store, which doesn't have anything interesting in it at all. And it is totally brilliant. You write in notes on a stave and then it goes boom and it captures those into notes, which are then there. You can play through MIDI and or orchestral libraries and all that kind of thing, and actually you hear your scores come to life. It's perfect for the person who writes notes by hand. How many people are like that? I don't know, but it's fascinating and interesting. It's been a brilliant showcase piece of software for the Surface platform. Now there's a new update, a huge update, which not only redesigns the engine and makes everything work so much better and fluidly, it takes it to iPad. Everyone's been calling and screaming, do it on the iPad, do it on the iPad. But the iPad's not had a reliable pen. It's not had a reliable handwriting system. Now it has on the iPad Pro with their pencil, the Apple Pencil. It can now handle what it is that StaffPad is good at. And that is the handwriting recognition, the translation of that into notes and the manipulation of it. So there you go. The glory days on the Surface are over, perhaps. Is it going to run better on the Surface? Well, I mean, you potentially have better libraries and more choice, because a Surface is essentially a desktop computer, a real proper computer running proper software, whereas on the iPad Pro you're going to be running only iOS apps. And does that mean it can only use the internal sounds, or can it connect to other sounds? I don't know. These things I do not know. But StaffPad themselves seem to be releasing some more sound, some more library to improve the playback possibilities. The other really cool feature is that you can push scores out to other users. So if you had a band, a small orchestra, huge orchestra, doesn't really matter. The conductor could have StaffPad on his iPad or Surface or something, and he can make a change and go boom, and that goes out to everybody else's iPad or Surface that's sitting on their music stand. I mean, that's brilliant. That is totally brilliant. Or take the composer score, pull out the different parts and throw them virtually about your orchestra. Superb. Really, really good. I think it's a really impressive development, a really impressive update, and of course it should go onto the iPad. Of course it should, so that everybody can use it. From Tangible Instruments comes Arpeggio, which is a funny looking little cute little slightly adorable box in kind of whitey cream with some buttons on the front, some green bits of text and stuff, and it's called Arpeggio. And they tell us it's a box for composing, saving and performing melodies. It's got a little keyboard on the front, it's hold a few notes and it starts doing its thing. You've got a lot of scope for improvisation and changes and throwing the arpeggiators this way and that way, backwards and forwards, in and out, pinging it, ponging it, changing notes. You can save these melodies and then chain them together up to 128 notes and saved up to 512 patterns. You can put in rests, you can change things about, put in ties, and delete stuff as you go. It's got an onboard virtual analog synthesizer with about 24 patches which to play the sounds. Or you send it out via MIDI, or you send it out via CV. So in some ways it can act as a little MIDI to CV converter, which is quite interesting. So it's a nice little box. What I can't quite wrap my head around is the price. It's about $249, which just seems a lot. I mean, that's more than a TD3, which is a baseline with an inbuilt sequencer and arpeggiator and things like that, and some other synths like the Crave. I mean, of course I'm talking Behringer, but it's just a little box, and just, I don't know, be interested to see what other people think. Black Corporation have announced a sequel to the Deckard's Dream, imaginatively named the Deckard's Dream Mark II. It's complete. No, it's not completely different. It's not different at all. The differences are almost completely aesthetic, as in it's now a nice, neat, thin desktop module. It's got wooden cheeks and everything, And that's great. I mean, they must have condensed everything down to surface mount components or whatever to make it into something just a little bit more manageable, because the original one came in a big fat rack mount case. Big fat rack mount case like this one, see? Because this is my one, which is yet to be installed, obviously. But now they've come out the same front panel, more or less, but made it into a nice, slim desktop thing, which is lovely. What a lovely thing to do. They have made another change in that they've added a sustain control, I think. Otherwise, it's more or less the same. I thought perhaps they could have integrated the effects that come from the expander, a bit more CV maybe. I don't know, something extra in the Mark II. But no, that it's really just to produce something which is a bit more desktop friendly. So there you have it. Now this is a cool one from a guy called Bertolt Meyer. He's a DJ and electronic musician, and he's remarkable in that he has one of his hands is missing. And that doesn't seem to hamper him in any way when making music in particular, but he does find, obviously, turning knobs and other fine levels of detail quite difficult. So he set about designing some way of getting over that. And he's produced this fascinating video which sort of talks you through his thought processes, which is definitely worth checking out. But sort of in a nutshell, he has some electrodes in part of his arm which respond to his brain. His brain fires these electrodes fire things which then open and close the prosthetic hand that he usually has there. So he thought, why can't I use those to control a bit of CV? And it was a good idea. And he did. He came across the Coma Field Kit, which has similar ideas built in of using very low voltages from either plants or bits and pieces in order to amplify and then generate useful control voltages. So he got in touch with them. They produced him a little amplifier PCB, and in true sort of steampunk pirate fashion, he unscrews his hand, put that down, and puts on this PCB instead, and that then he can patch into his modular, and he fires it and changes the control voltages using his brain, using his mind. I mean, he's been doing it for years and years and years because he was born without this limb, and that's a skill he's been able to develop over time. I don't know how applicable it would be to any old bod, just sticking a couple of electrodes on something and reckoning they could think their way to a bit of modulation. I don't know, but it's a fascinating project, absolutely fascinating, and could take us in all sorts of places if we let it. The Omsonic Stochastic Inspiration Generator. This thing is back. This time it's ready to go, I think. We saw this a while ago, and I was immediately intrigued by this module that you could add probability notes to. So you turn a few notes up, it scans through it. Does it play those notes? Depends on how far you've pushed up the slider. Push up the slider for more notes, less notes, that kind of thing. You can create tunes. It's kind of like quantizing, but when it's an instrument in of itself. So rather than you're pumping CV into a quantizer, which you're restricting to a few notes, then there it goes again, this is generating notes like a sequencer, but the probability of those notes, and lots of different probabilistic things as well, because you're talking about octaves, you're talking about gate lengths, you're talking about whether it fires or it doesn't. All sorts of things can be messed about with the same stochastic, I don't know, generating algorithms. Am I explaining this right? I don't know. It's got a bunch of sliders like a keyboard. Turn up the slider, higher the slider, more often the note appears. That's about it, really. Plus there's a load of other stuff that's associated with that, and I just really like it. I mean, I like anything that generates melody in interesting ways, and I ideally hope to get the opportunity to play with this fella. It also looks great. There's an expander for it, which turns it into a 4-channel device, which is getting really interesting. There's a lot of melody in that, lots of potential for melody in that anyway. And it's sort of very reasonably priced at about $275. They should be apparently going into manufacturing at the end of February, which is now. G-Storm Electro have come up with the XaVCF, which is a Eurorack module taking in or recreating or reimagining the Oberheim OBXA filter. So it's Eurorack again, you see, it's cloning something, taking something and building it into something else. It's what happens all the time. Eurorack feeds off each other and eats from each other and takes and develops and moves on. It does it, has always done it, will always do it. And you know, that's just part of how these things develop. And the XaVCF brings that classic Oberheim sound into Eurorack with all the original modes and a new one-pole band and low-pass mode. It's based on some alpha chips, which are recreations of the original Curtis chips used in the Oberheim. And along with the new one-pole filter, you have a 4-pole low-pass filter and a 2-pole state variable low-pass filter. Both of these modes can be pushed into self-oscillation, and if it's anything like the original Oberheim filter, it's going to feel soft, creamy, and really rather gorgeous. It's not the most sort of inspirational looking module, I have to say, but hopefully it will sound excellent. We don't know the full details of this yet, but Squarp seem to be poised to release Rample, which is a 4-voice sample player. It doesn't appear to have any recording inputs as such, but you can load samples from an SD card and have up to 4 channels of playback at once. There's no limitation on the size or length of your samples, and it's nice to see that it's also got a mix output. There are on the panel controls over pitch and bits and freeze, which we can all imagine what sort of things they do, and there's a whole bunch of effects inside as well. So you can see it as 4 independent channels of sample playback or a related 4-voice polyphonic sample player, which is very, very interesting. It also has a really interesting looking display with all these dots on it, which we still have no idea exactly what it is that does. But that's the exciting thing about getting to know things before they're actually out. Should be out in about March. FLUX. This is all about temporal modulation synthesis. It's kind of a rhythm generator, but then uses weird time travel algorithms or something to get in front or behind the timing of the time that you were timing. So it's capable of doing very complex and interesting moving and modulated rhythm patterns. Does all those polyrhythmic type of things and Euclidean type of rhythms, and can do simple stuff or burst 64 triggers out of a single step. In some ways it will fire so quickly that you can use it as a bank of oscillators. I still don't understand quite what that means. But anyway, it has algorithms inside that bend space and time and play with things like density on curves, linear curves, exponential curves, and all sorts of other curves too. It has 4 channels of the rhythm inside, plus some auxiliary outputs which can either mirror those or be used to set up delays or divide the clock or add in extra logic functions. They talk about it being free from grids and those sorts of normal quantized things, and to be very free flowing and interesting. Then it has an array of 4 encoders around this display in the middle, which are kind of macros which change the algorithms and change exactly what's going on. It seems really complex. I find it quite difficult to exactly work out what's going on, and in the video demos of it, it's just bang 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 bang, this really heavy banging of a single drum sound, and it's like after 30 seconds you just go, oh, make it stop. But it seems as though it could be really interesting if someone was just to give a little bit of a lighter touch to the demonstration of what's possible. That would be good. XFM2 is a development over the XFM, which essentially it's a DX7 on a flipping chip. It's an entire Yamaha DX7 synthesizer, 6-operator FM synthesizer, squeezed down onto a little board about this big. Sit that against another board, which is the DAC, which gives you the audio output. Mount that on another board with a MIDI socket and a USB socket, and bosh, you've got a DX7 in a box about this big that you could stick into your pocket and take to your gig. It's got 64 voices, 2 parts, you play 2 sounds at once, 6 operators. It's the real deal. I mean, obviously there's no display, there's no controls or anything of any kind. However, the whole FM engine within the XFM2 is completely MIDified and mappable to MIDI controls or whatever you like, either via regular MIDI or via SysX. You can get down and dirty to up to about 300 parameters if you so wish. I mean, undoubtedly some kind of librarian editor, some software editor for it is going to emerge, or some other way of using it just to dig in further, because this is remarkably cheap. And it looks easy to build. I mean, they're not giving you any particular instructions. You have to buy a bit of prototyping board, get a couple of these chips together, and the extra parts you need is only like half a dozen parts. and then work out how you solder those together purely from a schematic. But it's the sort of level of like having 5 or 6 things to solder together that I think that even I could have a go at. I can have a go at that. And then you've got a flipping DX7. Then you've got to work out how you're going to control it, how you're going to MIDI into it, how you're going to do all those sorts of things to make it a usable, interesting experience. But listening to the demos, sounds phenomenal. Sounds awesome. And it's only $99 for the lot, for everything that you need. And then you've just got to solder it together. It's even got a whole bunch of effects built in. I mean, this is the sort of device that I reckon a whole community is going to grow up over. So very quickly, I imagine, there's going to be people with ideas on how best to address all the parameters, or whether to create some kind of 8-knob MIDI controller that's going to do macro MIDI control over all the most important aspects. I don't know. I mean, it's that FM synthesis business, which can always be a little bit complex at times. But for $99, it's a DX7. Wow. We saw the Electrosmith Daisy at NAMM, and now it's just reached Kickstarter stage where you can start throwing some money at it yourself. What is it? Well, it's another one of these little chips with a load of stuff on it, like the XaVCF I mentioned a minute ago. But this one is slightly different. This is more of an open modular platform that can be whatever you like. So they're providing this Daisy, which is a chip, and into that you can program or set up all sorts of audio effects, all sorts of synthesizer modules and bits and pieces, and wire them together and create either the synthesizer of your dreams or the guitar pedal of your dreams, or whatever you like in that style. What Electrosmith have done, which is really, really very, very interesting, is they've created prototyping platforms for it, or environment platforms, I think they call it. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, there's one called Pedal, which is nice, which is a pedal. So it's a pedal, it's got a bunch of foot switches on it and a couple of knobs, and you mount your Daisy on that, and that then gives you the physical hardware, real world control you need over whatever it is that you've programmed the thing to do. The other one is Patch, which is a Eurorack module. Again, the Daisy sits in the middle and you've got these knobs and patch points, and that's all those things are realized to bring the synthesis of whatever it is, either modulation or sound generation you've put onto the Daisy, brings that out into your Eurorack. There's another one which is a little desktop synth with a little button keyboard on it, and then there's just a very cheaper version which is like a bare PCB that it sits in, that just gives you some ins and out and some MIDI. It's really going the extra yard to get these sorts of development tools and prototyping tools into people's hands. It's great. I love it. And the Daisy itself is only $29. $29. Now the boxes, they're a lot more expensive. They're like $300 and upwards, depending on which one that you want. But if you've ever considered the idea of developing your own Eurorack module or your own guitar pedal, then this is a great way to look at that. Quick one from Electron. They are poised to release the next in the model line of boxes of things that they do. They released the model sample a while back, which was this horrible cream coloured thing. It looked like a Yamaha box. I don't know. It just looked terrible as far as I could tell. But it was a sample-based kind of drum machine groove box type thing. They seem to be about to release another one called Modal Cycles, and this is an FM-based one. It's like a cut-down version of the Digitone, I think. That's my understanding of it. Don't know a whole lot about it yet, other than it's same coloured, horrible cream and grey box. It just looks awful. But I'm sure it's awesome. I mean, Electron have a massive fan base, very enthusiastic, and I imagine death threats and all sorts would come from me rubbishing it a bit like this. So I'm sure it's awesome, and they always sound great, and they always are awesome. It's just not really ever been my thing. One of these days, I'm going to get into this whole Electron thing, and then I'll properly feel cool then. That'll be exciting. I'll look forward to that, but I don't think it's going to be with this one. I don't know. Well, we haven't even heard it yet, so it could sound awesome. But I imagine it's a step sequencing thing with a thing and a bit of a groove box thing going on. So more information on that should be coming out soon. So if that's your bag, you should be hovering around the Electron's website.
And finally we have Ratchet. This is a Eurorack drum brain from Schottkey Modular. Schottkey, is that like a Sean Connery based modular company? I don't know. Anyway, it's run by Leah Harmon, and this is her first Eurorack module. Her first one! And it's massive. It's a massive thing covered in buttons and patch points. And it is 12 channels of drum sequencing, rhythm sequencing. Just quite extraordinary. There's all sorts of pages of stuff. I mean, it's all based on buttons on the top, and these are these like glow buttons like you find on the variegate, quite interestingly, but it doesn't have sliders or nothing. Everything is based on those buttons. So there's like 16 buttons, and you use those for the 16 steps, for instance, although it can be 32 steps, it can be 64 steps, of course. But also at the touch of another button, those buttons become the ratchet buttons, and you can have a whole stack of ratchets per step, or it can become the randomization buttons, and you can set up randomization depending on probabilities and bits and pieces, or gating, or swing, or what pattern you're using. And all the time you've got this wonderfully retro LED display in the middle showing you numbers on stuff. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very ordered, very straightforward, and yet has these layers of complexity and interest. And you're just scratching my chin going, oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, I wonder how it sounds. And then she's done this great little demo video where it just goes to town. You go, wow, that's amazing. So if you'd like to get into some deep level rhythm programming, because ultimately it's a step rhythm sequencer, then 12 channels of this could be amazing. Now I'm hoping to get hold of one to have a little bit of a go and have a little bit of a review, but probably before that I'm going to need to get hold of a lot more drum modules. 12 channels. I mean, obviously you don't have to just be pumping drums, you'll be pumping rhythm into all sorts of things, triggering all sorts of things, and that's what gets me excited about these sorts of modules, is that I can run a bit of percussion, but I can also start using the same ideas and the same rhythms through melodies and notes being played and other bits and pieces. So yeah, very exciting about that. So yeah, there you go. That'll do for this month. I think that's plenty. It's even been a quiet month, and yet I was still able to pull together a dozen or so bits and pieces to talk about. Coming up, first of all, I should talk about my live stream, because traditionally, we have the live stream on a Sunday night after I've done the Molten Music Monthly, but can't do it this weekend. I'm out Saturday, I'm out Sunday. I'm such a busy social person, as you can imagine. So I figured, well, I don't want to drop it because we haven't done one of those for a while either. So let's go for Tuesday, right? Tuesday. So Tuesday next week. I don't even know what date that is. Oh, that'll be March the 3rd. So March the 3rd, Tuesday night. I mean, no one's doing anything on a Tuesday, are they? We'll get together around about 8 o'clock, I think, with a bit of luck, and we'll just chat about stuff, shall we? Chat about things? Yeah, what have we got to chat about? Well, who knows? We've got things coming up, like Super Booth in April, and then I have the honour of being invited back to the Thomann Synth Reactor 2020. That's very exciting. So I'm going back to Bavaria in order to hang out and party around the Thomann shop and make lots of interesting videos on synthesizers with a bunch of other crazies. So that'll be great, and that's in May. The only thing that then brings up is, as I'm eating my lunch and listening to the news and hearing about Italy being shut down, I'm thinking, I wonder whether making travel plans right now is the best idea. I don't know, maybe that's something we can talk about on Tuesday, about how are we worried about this coronavirus business? Is Super Booth going to be a washout? Because I'm hoping and planning to take my kids along. I want to take a couple of young boys with me to Super Booth to press on synthesizer buttons and bits and pieces, and is that wise at the moment? Got to think that it's all right, isn't it? Well, anyway, worth talking about. Otherwise, on the video front, I've done a lot of computer-based stuff recently. I've been trying to get through a whole bunch of things. I've nearly finished the Audio PC series. It's now done up to installed in Windows. I just want to do a tuning Windows one. And then I'm going to do a fascinating video on laptops generally, which is exciting. Just done the Surface Pro 7 performance testing. That's up there. And I'm about to embark, after I finish this video, on the Surface Pro X, which I have for one more week. I've only got it for a week and I haven't turned it on yet. Got to get to that, got to check it out, got to see what's possible on the Surface Pro X. Then
Once that is out of the way, it's going to be Eurorack for a good long session, because I've got 4 or 5 modules on here that I really need to do reviews and demonstrations of, because they're awesome and you need to hear about them and I need to tell you about them. So I've got a lot of good stuff coming on that. So that'll do, I think. And please do remember to share, like, subscribe, all those sorts of things. If you're into what I do and like what I do, then please consider sponsoring me on Patreon. Throw me a couple of dollars and helping me create more of this content. That would be amazing. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.